Well, it's been a while since I've done a video, and in particular it's been a while since I've done a video on segmented turning, and I'm going to get back into segmented quite a bit here in the near future. I've missed it, I've been doing other work, but now I want to get into some work based on previous pieces that I've done. And what I'm going to be doing next is going to be based somewhat on this piece. Now if you look on the inside, you can see that little detail that shows these intersecting loops. The way I accomplished that, you can see here, is by cutting these pieces on an angle and then reassembling it. And when I did that, as you can see here, I'll pull you in a little bit tighter maybe, and we can discuss this a little with some more detail. You can see how there's some alignment differences in the lines, like this one doesn't go straight across, which means I know that this was the second lamination I did after I did this one. And what causes that is the offset of the cut when you from the saw. When you cut the second lamination, you're going to remove material. Now you can see these lines here are just basically veneer lines. The saw kerf is going to be at least this thick, and then when you sand it to remove the saw teeth marks that are left by the bandsaw blade, you're going to remove even more material. What's that going to do is offset the first lamination and give you this kind of a little skip in it. Another issue that comes up is misalignment when you glue pieces back together. The objective, of course, when you do this kind of work is to cut, put your lamination in, and re-glue it, hopefully with no offset, no slippage, in other words, or misalignment. So that brings me to some ideas that I've come up with we're going to employ in this next piece. Now, this is a nice large chunk of Purple Heart. You can see I've been drawing on it a little bit because I've been laying out what we're going to do to this. For one thing, this is going to be the base of a segmented bowl. I'll show you the other pieces very shortly when we get to them, because I'm going to have a turban designed layer that goes on this, and then the actual laminated pieces, and then the top ring. So it's going to be a fairly large bowl. I want the base to have that kind of detail that I just showed you, but hopefully with a little more accuracy. One of the things that's going to allow me to get that, it might sound silly until we get into it, is that I'm going to put laminations that are 1/8 of an inch thick. That will buy me a little bit of range to remove the material. I'm still going to cut it with the bandsaw, but as we get to that part, we'll talk about it more in depth. The next thing I want to show you is some of the things I've drawn on here, and particularly this edge. You can see where I've got this little dotted line. That's kind of an estimation of how the cross-section of the dish that I put in the bottom of the bowl is going to come up, align itself with this blank. That will give me some room for a foot and still have some thickness here so I don't punch through the bottom of the bowl. And then what I've done is I've located these cut lines. These are actually based on a drawing I did, as you can see here, where I got them lined up with dimensions so that they are balanced and equal. But more importantly, what's going to happen is you'd think the next detail will be to cut these and do the lamination, but that's not quite true, because if you look at the top, this is the two circles I've drawn. One is the maximum circle. That's probably the circle I'm going to cut the piece out when I'm all done with this work. Well, pardon me, with the laminations before I make it the actual bottom of the bowl. The next one is a guesstimate, and that's close enough for now, of where the engagement of the dish is going to start. And that will all come out when we make the final bowl. The interesting part that's going to happen next, though, is that 4 holes are going to be drilled out here outside the largest circle area. And these holes are going to cut through the plane that I'm going to make when I cut these lines. The reason for these holes is they're going to be the size of dowel rods. I'm going to drill 4 of them in there, and use 2 when I glue up one layer and the other 2 when I cut the other layer. And what that will do is when I glue this all back together, I'll put the dowel rods in those holes, and then when I put the piece back on, I know the alignment will be exactly what I want. So let's go to that and we'll make those drill holes. Okay, I've got the drill press set up now. I'm just going to drill all 4 holes right now, even though I'm only going to use 2 at a time, because certainly we have perfect alignment right now since it's one block. I haven't cut anything. One detail I want to point out though is that I've calibrated my drill press depth so that I will not go all the way through. That's intentional, of course, because I don't want to have these punching out the bottom when I'm trying to clamp, and really there's no need for them to come out the bottom, so it'll help to have a stop for the dowel rod, so that when I'm trying to force the top on, it doesn't shoot out the hole and not align in the gauge. So let's drill these holes. Probably make some noise, but it's always fun to hear noise. With that, I've got 4 holes, 1 in each corner. I'll say that the location doesn't matter that much because it's going to be in the waste area that we're going to cut away anyway. All they have to do is return the block after I cut it in half to the exact same orientation it was before. Now towards that end, I don't know if this will come out or not, but I wanted you to see I've got these little designs drawn on here. They mean nothing. They're just unique designs so that when I go to align this, I'm certain that I'm putting it back the way it was. Things can happen sometimes, and in the confusion of trying to put things together, it'll come out wrong. So sometimes you just do a squiggle that's obvious and impossible to get wrong on one edge, and that will always help you return the edge where it needs to be. But there's more steps to go, and we're going to move right along. So now I'm ready to do the cut on the bandsaw, and one thing I want to point out is on the back side where I'm holding it, I've got a nice little 90-degree angle. That was just to assure that I'm going to stay nice and perpendicular to the table here with this piece, make sure it doesn't do any kind of wobbling on it, just to give us some stability. When you're going to do a cut like this, you're going to run the blade nice and fast, and cutting Purple Heart like this is probably going to howl, so do feel free to put on your ear protection. It's going to get nasty. Let's give it a go. That was nice and uneventful like I like it. Now that we've got our cut, you see we now have the 2 pieces here, and the holes are in place, so I'll be able to do the realignment. But there's another trick that we have to do, because I'm going to put this through my drum sander to get all those ripples out. There are ripples there that would be obvious when I glue this together, particularly since I'm using 1/8 inch thick. There'd be voids. So we're going to make that go away, but we're going to have to make a fixture to do that, because as you can see, this is a wedge shaped piece, and I have to tip it up so that this surface will be parallel to my drum in my drum sander. So we'll get to that next. Well, now that I have the 2 halves cut, if you've got a good image, I don't know, but you can see that this is not perfectly flat, and that's just the nature of cutting something like this on a bandsaw. So I want that flat. I could probably go to my 6x48 belt sander, flip it around, and try to flatten it. And I'll probably get it flat, but what would also potentially happen is it might get an angle on it, other than the angle that's already there. What I'm saying is that it's almost impossible to take this down the minimal amount of material removal and get it parallel to this edge here, which is what I want in both. So what I'd like to do is run this through my drum sander. But of course you can't put this through the drum sander like this unless you do something to prepare it. And that's what I've done here. Let me show you. I've cut 2 sticks. This is out of some oak that I had around. And you can see I've got an angle there. That angle will match the angle that I've cut here so that it will nest in there and hold the surface that I want flattened and smooth parallel to the base. And that way there, when I put these back together, the angle will still be there. I'll have flattened it by removing the minimal amount of material so that then when I put the insert in there, I'll probably simply just replace the material that I've removed. That's particularly going to be important for the second cut for alignment purposes. If you do something like this, you have to keep in mind that you're going to have to calibrate this very carefully so that when you put your piece of wood in here, and I'll show you how it's going to go, you don't want any tipping back and forth. You can't let this rock at all. Also, when I put this on there, I'm going to be at the far corners, but to make sure that things are seated nice and securely, if you look at this carefully, you can see how I've got it going to rest on this surface right here actually, and then I dip down so that in between there's nothing for this to rock on. So I'm just supporting it on the ends. Also, you'll see that white tape there. That's the protective covering for the double stick tape, so that when I put this on here, it'll be actually taped down and held securely when I run it through the drum sander. So let me prepare this, and then we'll go to the drum sander, and I'll show you how this works. I got the drum sander all set, ready to go. So I'll turn it on and show you how this is going to work. Now here's the piece ready in the little cradle that I made of those 2 pieces of oak that I showed you earlier. And it's going to be run through like this, and hopefully it'll give us what we're after. So this will make some noise, but just the nature of the beast. There, it's starting to work. You can hear it. What we'll do is you can see I have to help it along a little bit. That's for a couple of reasons. For one thing, I'm taking the high spots out first. You can see sort of what it did there back in here. It's taking those high spots off. So consequently, you have to apply enough pressure on this flat, which is basically a big loop of sandpaper. And it's probably a little worn out, so it has to grip the bottom here to drive it through against the pinch rollers that are in the top part of this. So you might have to help it along, but that's fine. One way to help it along is just push down hard on the piece so that it will engage that sandpaper. And here it took a little more of a bite, and we'll let it come out here. And you see now how unevenly it's starting to sand that down, and that's because again of that drift a little bit of the bandsaw blade will increase this, which brings the table up and take another bite. And I'll just keep repeating this until I get this completely smooth. Then I'll do the other piece, and that'll be that, and we'll go on to the next step. I'm now ready to go ahead with the gluing, and you can see I've cut a couple of pieces. Actually, this is one. I've got the other one on the bench because I won't need it until I do the cross-lamination. This is a piece of maple. It's about a 1/4 inch thick or so, and I made it a little thicker than an 1/8 inch that I had originally intended, because when I measured the amount of material I removed with these angled cuts and then the finishing, I realized I took out more than an 1/8 of an inch. So I wanted to come closer to the actual original thickness of these pieces so that everything should come out pretty well. I've driven the first dowel rod in here. Now I've already pre-measured these for length and cut them down so that when I put the other piece on top, these dowel rods will not stick up. I'm going to drive this one in now. And I'm driving it into the bottom of the hole. Remember, I drilled those holes not through, so I know that the dowel rod will go in far enough to not stick out. Now, I'm just going to do a dry fit first to confirm that the holes will line up, the dowel rods will line up. Now when I go to do my actual gluing, I'm going to have to drive this top piece down onto it. You see I'm using the angled boards that I built before, these little fixtures to hold it on an angle, because when I put this top part on, admittedly I could glue it this way. But when I do that, there's going to be tremendous force trying to slide, because the glue surface will be on an angle relative to the clamping force. So this hydraulic bearing effect will allow it to try and push and perhaps even snap the dowel rod off. So I don't want that to happen, so if I put it on here, then it holds the glue surface flat. When I clamp, there'll be no sliding pressure, and I can put a lot of pressure on there without concern. I'm going to go get the glue next. Of course, even though I tried to get everything ready in advance, I still managed to forget the glue over in the cabinet. Now I'm going to first spread the glue on this surface, and the spreader I use is one of the best uses for a credit card I found. Is I cut little teeth onto it and then use it almost like a grout spreader. This will spread the glue out, give good coverage without letting too much get on there, and have it just goosh glue all over the place. So now I've got that down. I can put this down and then put more glue on this surface, and the same concept here. Now let's see about putting this last piece on. Okay, see, I had to drive it in with a hammer, but now everything's lined up. The piece of laminate is trapped in there because of the way I cut the corners, so that I know that it can't go anywhere because the dowel rods will hold it in place. Now I use the matching fixture that I cut before, which compensates for that angle. And now when I put clamping force on here, and I'll pull these in a little bit just to distribute the force a little more favorably. Now I can clamp here straight down, and everything will stay in alignment, and I'll be able to get the clamping force on that I want. I'll clamp these first on the longer ones here, and I can see I got to pull this around a little bit to access. where I want to put my load. And that will be that. And I'll just let this sit and cure. We'll be good for the next step. Well, I got the clamps off after gluing, and it came out the way I'd hoped. It's going to be set on this edge next for cutting, and you could tell everything went back the way it should. There's no rocking, which means that all the alignments have been maintained, and that's because of these dowel rods. Next, I'm going to cut the opposite diagonal, which is going to go across this way, and cross the piece that we just put in there. And I'm going to use the other two unused dowel holes to realign, and I'll get that done, and then we'll come up to the next step. Well, I got the final gluing done, and you can see now it's one nice, somewhat complicated block. And I want to point out the next step. Now, you can see on this surface where I've drawn circles, and these were done when I first started, just kind of to define the area I'm going to end up with. And now I wanted to go and find the center of the geometry that I just glued in. So I found these peaks where this purple heart comes to a point and marked it, and then between the two I marked the center, and I did that on both sides here. Then I carried that center line up to the top and drew a line across. It turns out that my layup must be pretty good because it comes right about at the same center point as I defined when I started. That means that all these laminations that I did appear to have come out perfect, and that was what I was after. The next thing I'm going to do now is to cut the circle out and then use the second circle inside as the reference circle that I center everything to on the faceplate, using the same rotating centering technique as I've shown before. And then I'll be able to start building the bowl up on the waist block of the faceplate to bring it to complete and ready to turn, segmented turning, and then we'll go from there. That's how this foot came to be, and hopefully the final product will come out as I have it designed. Well, rather than having you go back again and trying to find what I did before about the centering method, I figured I'd just show it again with this bowl. Now, what I've got is a rotating stage that I've put my faceplate on, and you can see I've got this thing rotating very true on center. The way I can define that is, if you look on this faceplate, you'll see these rings that are machined in, and I've slid this back and forth on there until I can see that ring is sitting still, and that tells me that the whole faceplate is centered, and that means also that when I put this on my lathe, it will be rotating on the same center. Now, of course, I want this piece to rotate on that same center, and I'll put it on here, and as I said, I'm using this inner ring to center to. Now, if I rotate it now, you can see how it's, well, unfortunately it's kind of close, but I wanted to illustrate, like if I had it off, you'd be able to see that thing wobbling around. I've got a pointer which I can move around here, and I can locate it on that center point. Now that I have everything set and ready to go, I'm going to put my glue on, and I just use plain old wood glue, the yellow conventional stuff. It gives me enough open time to do this properly, and you'll see why that's important and why super glue or something really quick would not work. Now I'm just going to spread this out evenly. Before I did this, I turned the surface here on the lathe so that I know there's no run out on it. And that means that it's nice and flat and square to the lathe, and whatever I put on it will be equally square to the lathe. So now I'm going to plop this on and in general get it close. And now you can see it's off a bit. And you just do kind of the method of halves and push down a little bit each time to start the engagement process. And I'll get a little bit close, but now I'm ready to put this pointer into position so that I can start referencing that circle. And I can see I'm way off here, so I want to go about half the distance, and let's see what we got. Much closer. Now, since this coming out properly means that it has to be really close to the center, I'm going to take my time and really work at this. And you have to keep checking, because you'll think you didn't move it in one direction and you really did, and that can be a bit of an irritation. But you have to keep checking until you're really pretty much dead on where you want to be. And then go with it. Now once I get this as close as I think I can get it, I'll just put a weight on it and let it sit overnight. This is the kind of thing I tend to do near the end of the evening in the shop, because then I know I can just go upstairs and get to it the next morning. One thing I'll also point out, when you're doing this kind of thing, if you ever move the faceplate on the table, you have to quickly go back and recenter that, because it's a stepwise process that one builds on the next, and it's really important that you maintain that. I think that's about as close as I'm going to really get it. Sometimes now you'll be off by the width of a line or something. Trust me, in the final piece you just won't see it. Now I'll put the weight on, then I'll just give it one more check just to make sure that everything looks good. And it really does. That's where I'm going to leave it now. And when you make that decision, you just don't touch it anymore. That's the centering technique that I use, and everything will build up from there, and we'll see that later.